Wilbanks, and with me today is Jim McCarty, who is one of the three members who originally were invested in their time and energy and putting together the research for the Law of One material, also known as RA. And with me today, thank you for joining me, is Jim. Hi, Jim.
Greetings. Yeah, good to see you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure, Jim. So I hear you've had a little bit of snow up in your neck of the woods. How are y'all holding up?
We had more than we've had in a long time, but now the sun has come and the warm's come. It's melted the snow. The problem now is flooding. But soon, in a couple days, that'll be over, and the flowers are coming up. We've got snowdrops and crocus in bloom in the backyard. I've got tulips and daffodils coming up, and I'm just ready to plant some pansies I bought.
That is fantastic. That is great. And Carla, can you give us a little update about her? How's her health condition?
Well, she is just about 4 years into this working with the catalyst of the back surgery and being down because of it and having just about nothing work to heal it. Mm-hmm. And she continues in that way. Physically, I guess she's getting weaker, but she's always had a happy heart. She has never complained one day. And I think one of the reasons is that we've kind of figured out that we made these plans beforehand, and her sicknesses and her need for caregiving and my need to be a caregiver have all come together because we planned it very well.
And when you say you planned it very well, Jim, what are you referring to? It doesn't sound like this is a plan that just came about 4 years ago. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that really means?
Well, I'm talking about pre-incarnatively planning it together as part of our service. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, just about everybody, I do believe, plans their incarnations, especially now as we're toward the end of this master cycle and graduation is so close. And we plan in order to get the greatest opportunity to learn what we need to learn to graduate or to be of service, whatever our goals are. And I think, as Ross said, there are no mistakes. And sometimes a situation like an illness that Carla has, that many people could see as some sort of mistake that's got to be corrected because you've got to be well, according to how we define wellness. And although that may seem to be the case, it's not really. This past summer, in the middle of the summer, it just finally came to me after taking care of Carla for over 3 years at that point, that we really had planned it. That what she had learned in the beginning of her incarnation was how to give without expectation of return. Now, to balance that, she needs to learn how to receive the love offerings of others. And part of her incarnation is not only that, but also to increase the indigo ray, which in the raw contact it was mentioned that it was dimmer than the rest of her rays. That it has to do with self-worth. So if she feels she's worthy to receive this care that I give her, then it aids her in both those respects. And my need is to open up this, in this incarnation, my heart completely with unconditional love. And the way I can do that is by serving the one I love the most 24 hours a day, whatever she needs.
That's
so that's the way it works. I mean, I believe that's the way it works, and we both feel that very strongly.
That's pretty amazing. But also, you know, that you all didn't really come together as a couple until after the raw research started. Is that correct? Can you take us back to 1981 and tell us a little bit about the sequencing of how it all played out?
Oh, sure. At 1980, when I first met Don and Carla, I was living in central Kentucky in a log cabin on a little piece of land in the woods that I had been for 6 years by myself. And I heard them one night on the radio station. My battery powered, I didn't have electricity, and they were talking about UFOs and channeling and interesting information. So on the other side of the county I lived in was a group that they had begun years ago called FSPAN. It was really metaphysically oriented, and they were also part of the Back to the Land movement at that time, as was I. And they bought this piece of land in order to be able to farm it and to build homesteads and to live fairly well what we would call now off the grid. And I knew from our food buying clubs in the area that this group was connected with Don and Carla in Louisville. So I said, well, do you know them? And they said, yeah, sure we do. Would you like to go to one of their meditations? I said, I sure would. So we were about 70 miles away at that time. That was in fall of 1980. I had just met Don and Carla in July at a local consciousness raising group. It's called Ken Kai's and Cornucopia Institute. And I met there because Don and Carla's group was instrumental in helping them find their location. So we came up to Louisville to the meditation, and I met Don and Carla in person, and we just seemed to recognize each other right away. And I just decided to keep on coming every weekend when they had meditations. So as time went on, I was able to get to know them even better. I helped them move to the location where we eventually had the Law of One, or the raw contact. That was in the summer of 1980. And then I decided to go out to Oregon for a while. I thought my fate was out there, even though I just met Don and Carla. It felt very good. I had this tendency to myself to be rather, I plan things, and I get things done because I plan fairly well, but I tend to be rigid in my planning. And I thought that I needed to go to this group that was channeling cosmic awareness, the Akashic records of the planet. So I spent a little time out there and had a great time, but then I had the opportunity to come back to Louisville after I took a weekend out to meditate on what I should do. And the very clear answer came within the first 30 seconds of the meditation: returned to Louisville and joined Don and Carla. So I was in Portland, Oregon at the time, so I'd driven 2,400 miles to get there, another 2,400 back, just to move 70 miles up the road to join Don and Carla. And 3 weeks after I joined them, the raw contact began. That was I joined them in late December of 1980, and the raw contact began on January 15th, 1981.
And I understand you tried a little bit to do the actual channeling yourself, and what happened with that?
Well, yeah, as most people, I was fascinated a great deal about channeling entities from another dimension or planet or a higher level of being, and so that was the flashy thing that got my attention right away. So I decided to try it, and for 25 years, I was, Carla thought I was a pretty good student, but I thought that after 25 years of working as hard as I could, I had reached a level of mediocrity. And I thought, we don't need another mediocre channel. I'm sitting next to the best one I've ever heard. Why? There are other things I can do with my energy. So, but being dogged, I stuck with it for 25 years. I channel now if I'm needed.
Now, during that time, your role was vital, just as was Dawn's and Carla, and you were the what Ra called the scribe, and also I understand you sat there and projected loving energy and blessed the water for her. So, what was that like for you to sit there and sort of observe what was going on?
Well, it was probably the most amazing experience of my life, because I felt, just as Don and Carla did, that the information we were getting and the way it was being delivered was very clear and very, once you heard it, it may blow your mind for a moment, but then you think about it, and yeah, well, that's the way things fit. It was a unified cosmology of how it all works, how our evolution through this density works, how we make choices to become positively oriented entities, to be of service to others. So it was a wonderful experience. And after the meditations, Carla, being in a trance in which she left her body, had no memory at all of what went on. So we always did her exercise period afterward, and she was always giving me, she wanted questions, what went on. But for the first 21 sessions, Don wanted to conduct it as a scientific experiment. He didn't want her to know anything about what was being channeled, because he didn't want her knowledge of it to affect what she was doing. That's a scientific approach, and he was, to the the very end, always a scientist. Although he was very much fascinated by and so easily a participant in the metaphysical, the level of experience that does not have a scientific explanation for us yet in our reality. So that was the way it was. She always wanted to know. And when finally she asked Don to ask Ra if she could read the material, Don then acceded to her wishes and asked, and Ra said, sure, it makes no difference. Her vocabulary is very good, and we don't usually have to go beyond her vocabulary. Occasionally we pick a word out that she may not know, but that makes no difference at all. So she finally got to read it after session 23. and I didn't have to answer quite so well. Then I could answer the questions, and I could tell her what went on. And from that point on, we all took part in planning the questions that would begin the next session the following day. And we usually got 1 or 2 questions into the session, and then Rob would give an answer that would be so fascinating and take you in another direction that off Don would go. And we would go with him because it was, it was. I think that was one way that Rob observed our free will to determine what was the focus of the questions in the session. But they gave us hints now and then. They gave us an answer we just couldn't refuse to go, ask more about it.
Right, and there were so many instances where even they sort of skirted around some of the questions if they didn't feel that that was the appropriate direction that they wanted to go. So that was rather interesting how they did that.
Well, there were 2 reasons why they wouldn't directly answer a question. One, the most important for them and for us, was the concept of free will. If it would abridge our free will by knowing the answer, then they didn't want to infringe upon what they call the law of confusion. We have to make our choices out of confusion. In order for
Jim, stop there for a second. If I may interrupt you, somehow we have a glitch on sound. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. We had a glitch of sound, so whatever you just said got totally distorted. If you would please state it once again.
Okay. You're asking why sometimes Rod wouldn't directly answer our question. And the most important reason was the law of free will. They didn't want to infringe upon our free will because the strength of our choices comes from being made as much as possible by our own free will, exercise our own muscles of making decisions. So that was the most important one. The other was more technical or mechanical. If we didn't already have the basis of information to understand the answer that would answer our question, then they would say there is intervening material necessary.
Right. So along the lines of the general information of our viewers, would you mind giving us what Ross stated as the different principles? Free will was the first distortion, and then just can you run those for us?
Sure. Don was always asking about the basic concept of the Creator and what the universe was made of, and Ra's basic response was, it's one being, it is the Creator. And the reason there is a creation is so the Creator can know itself more fully. And it knows itself most fully when those portions of the creation have free will. So in order for us in this density to have free will, we have to have a veil of forgetting between the conscious and unconscious minds. So we live basically consciously unless we make efforts to access the unconscious or subconscious by meditation or hypnosis or whatever. So the first distortion in the law of oneness of the universe was the concept of free will, that the Creator would become many, or seeming to become many, and seeming to be separate from itself, in order that it could know more about itself through these portions of itself having free will. So the way this worked was the desire to know itself. The creative power of the universe is the Creator and is love. So that was actually the second distortion, then, that love would have a creative ability. So the consciousness of the Creator shined through free will, creating love, and love then precipitated what we call of light. The universe seems to be made of photons, what we call photons. And those are the basic principles. After that, Ross suggested that the laws are many, but these are the most important ones here. Free will, love, and light.
So those are the 3 main distortions. That's a really nice and simple, easy, sweet way to put it so that everybody can access that information rather rapidly and carry it on with them. Since the research has ended, what has the LNL research as it stands now been, focusing on in order to continue its work in support of others?
When Don died in 1984, we continued on with our Sunday meditations, which were always open to the public, and we usually averaged 6 to 10 people. They were comfortable size, not a lot, and we continued our publishing of books and our sending out of material. When people asked if we had a speaker that could come, we would attempt. Both Carl and I would go. We continued that, and Carla was at the same time writing various books. She had also, in the early morning, when we have our morning offering, we always had a meditation time, and she would open herself to channel then what she called the Holly or the Holy Spirit, just in order to exercise her ability to both tune herself as an instrument to the highest she can hold, and also to challenge an entity each time in the name of what she held most dear. And for her, that was Jesus the Christ. And for others, it could be anything that is the center about which you revolve. So she was exercising herself at that time, and she decided, well, since she's got the Holy Spirit on the line, might as well get a little message for the day. So she channeled a book called Channelings from the Holy Spirit. And she also wrote a channeling handbook, and she also wrote the Law of One 101, which is kind of a layman's adaptation of the Law of One, which many people find as a kind of a difficult language or way of putting things. So Carla tried to make it easily understood for the person on the street. So we were writing books and putting out a newsletter 4 times a year, and having a homecoming each year, so that folks that felt that they, a lot of people that read our books found themselves in a situation of being in a small group of people they could talk to and being rather isolated, really. And so they like to come and join with other people that were perhaps in the same situation, and be able to talk about the things that really mattered to them for an entire weekend. And for a lot of folks, that was really a lot of fun. And we've enjoyed it every year. We continue that. And like I said, we did the channelings up until 4 years ago when Carla had her back surgery. And we haven't done them since because she wants to be at her best. And the pain medication she takes for that, she feels affects her mind enough that she would not want to attempt channeling at that time of any kind.
Do you have maintained a community fairly live and well who continues to help support you and to propagate the data, the information? When you look back at, you know, your work involved in everything that you personally did, what was to you the most challenging and the most exciting part about those particular 4 years while you were doing the research?
Well, it was the beginning of developing a really honest and loving relationship with Carla. That was really how we first got together. Don was interesting in that the first 6 months of his experience of meeting Carla, 16 years previous to my meeting them both, or 12 years prior, was that he really enjoyed the sexual aspect, but basically he was a monk and he wanted to be celibate. So Carla, acceded to his wishes because, she wished for his free will to have its full sway, and that's the way he really was, who he wanted to be. So he did not have any problem at all for Carla and me to develop a relationship because I provided what he couldn't or didn't want to. So that's probably one of the reasons we were able to get along so well. That we didn't have competition in areas that normally 2 guys and 1 female would have competition. He had an ability to meet her intellectual and spiritual needs, which I'm sure I did in some degree, but that was what he had his strength in. And mine was the sexual energy exchange. That was one of the things I did for Carla for the contact that we did publish in book 5 in the personal material, but we discovered by chance that if Carla and I had sexual intercourse the night before a session, she had increased energy for the session that would increase the length of the session. So we discovered the value of sexual energy exchanges. What the male has to offer the female is physical energy in abundance, usually overabundance. What the female has to offer the male in exchange is spiritual and emotional, mental energy. And I always thought the male got the better of the deal, But it really helps.
Tell me a little bit more about the sexual aspect, because a lot of people, look at this and they say, wow, that's kind of, but really the old principles or the Egyptian concept was to raise the Kundalini in a way that it enhanced states of consciousness. So can you go a little bit as to and explain how that really works? Because a lot of people hear the word sex and their mind just starts spinning.
Yeah. It's pretty common in our culture. We have a lot of taboos on things that maybe they don't need quite as strong a taboo. You asked also about how I helped energize during the contact. So there's a relationship between how I energized Carla prior to the contact the night before and during the contact. During the contact, I actually visualized her energy centers, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, green, yellow, green, blue, indigo. And I would send energy to her throughout that entire spectrum. And during the sexual energy exchange, I believe the same thing was occurring, but it was occurring from what we would call the bottom up, the red through the violet. And when I did the sending during the contact in a meditative state, I sent it to her the violet through the red. I think there was a flow of energy that was set up there that aided her not only in helping her to clear her channel, but to give her energy to keep her channel open. Ra suggested that a normal session, which for us was between 45 and 60 minutes, was equal to Carla as a full day's harsh physical labor. So she would lose between 2 and 3 pounds each session. And she got down to 84 pounds, which at that time her normal weight was about 110 to 115. So she got to be pretty small. And it did help her a good deal to have sexual energy exchanges. We just discovered by looking at the length of the sessions and correlating when we had made love last that there was a correlation. And finally, when we asked Ra about it, Ra gave us the information that this was true and that it did aid the instrument to have this energy during the session. And the sessions would therefore be longer.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, to think that you can actually feel healthier, more energized through intercourse, but yet when you say intercourse, you know, we're not speaking necessarily of the same type that, you know, every jump bones kind of thing. It's just more of a tantric breathing and looking into each other's eyes and so forth. So I get it that it's perhaps a little bit different than most people would imagine. Is that correct?
Yes, Ra said that the area of sexual magic was a legitimate area of inquiry, and that high sexual magic was one means of progressing spiritually. We didn't get into that in great detail, and people will probably wonder why, but we actually had other questions we wanted to ask first. In retrospect, it might have been you know, a bestseller if we had asked that question instead. Otherwise, we find ourselves happily located between obscure and unknown. But as far as the sexual energy exchanges went, and the actual sexual intercourse, it was probably more prolonged than most people would spend time. The reason is because it's like charging a battery, and the longer you prolong it, the more energy that is created and then exchanged when the point of orgasm is reached. And usually, well, with Carla and me, it just kept getting more intense and better over the years, whereas the length, the number of the orgasms and the intensity increased. And I think that is probably a legitimate path to the Creator. We are still happily exploring it.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I guess when two people not only love each other, but they've already nurtured their inner core, their self, and you're uniting, you know, through torsion, meaning your torus field, and you are clear and so forth. You're really boosting each other right there through that portion, that union, which was, in my understanding, why the mystery schools or the Egyptians used to speak of the Ankh, which was the symbol for sexuality in a way of how to sort of move energy through the body from your bottom chakra, root chakra, all the way up, and then circulate it. So that's you've just attested to that experience. So what's next? How can we aid this working moving forward? I know you guys have expended an awful lot of time, energy, and love and dedication, but how can others be of value in contributing to this knowledge to be handed down through generations?
Well, I guess just living the talk, walking the talk. Read the books, become familiar with the information. If it strikes a chord in you, then share it when you have the opportunity. We don't ask anybody to be an evangelist. Whenever you're asked is an appropriate time to respond, and to respond with a whole heart. Just say whatever you feel. Every person has a way of sharing the love and the light of the Creator, and I think we're all here to find that way of doing it. And it's just like a fingerprint or the iris. You know, they're unique, and yet they're the same. They look basically the same, and yet each one is somewhat different. There is no other person just like you on the planet or any other planet. So we all have a way of sharing, and so just share whatever is your way. Eventually, this planet will become more light-filled. And when we were asking Ra what the possibilities were for the graduation of this planet, you know, it didn't look at the time like there would be a large service to others oriented percentage, that most of the planet would be too mixed, that they wouldn't have made a choice to go either positively or negatively oriented. And at the end of the answer, Ra said, but there is always one possibility that in one fine, strong moment of inspiration, the entire planet could change its consciousness. Though it is small, it is ever present. So do what you can, you know, wherever you are. All these little slogans come to mind, you know, the think globally, act locally, and each one teach one. But anyway, I think they all make sense.
And now, I know that Carla has maintained, and obviously for the last 4 years since her condition, she has not been able to channel, but from the other entities, could you tell that there's been some progress in the state of consciousness globally?
I would be totally surprised if there hadn't been, because every time that question was asked, and frequently people would ask that question, especially if they were visiting from out of town, and the answer was always that there is a constant progress being made. You know, we're walking closer to the light. We're walking closer in the light. We are closely becoming the light. So I'm sure. I mean, I see everywhere how people are helping each other, even in the news that you see on the major stations each night. They always have one human interest story at the end that always touches your heart. And I know, just like everything else, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many people helping other people on the planet in every possible way, medically or socially, with clothes, with opportunities to vote, to medicines. There's all kinds of ways of helping people. So yeah, I think that there has been a great deal of progress, and I'm extremely optimistic about the possibilities for the graduation. That's a time which we really don't know when it will be. Ross suggested it was between 100 and 700 years from the point where we began the contact, which was 35 years ago. So who knows? There could be plenty of time left. We just need to keep trucking. There's another one of those tritisms. Old hippies never die. They just remember everything.
You know, I've encountered other channeled materials through other channels, and what's interesting is how, even though the information is slightly different, there's still some correlations. And one of the, just recently, I've become familiar with the work of Tom Kenyon, who channels the Hathors, and I found an incredible similarity to the civilization that he described as being the Hathors and that of Ra. And as a matter of fact, what was strikingly interesting to me was that he described the male energy of that civilization by the name of Amun-Ra, which I thought, well, that sounds a lot similar to I'm Ra when he or they came through with Carla. And then the female expression of that civilization was the Hathor goddess. But one of the most interesting and unusual things that I found is that when they described their path into Venus from Sirius and so forth, and I thought, boy, that's awfully, the coincidences are incredible. But in the big picture, what was conveyed was still overall the same: the love and the light and the power of energy and so forth, and how much progress we have made. So I'm encouraged that there's other people like yourself or your group who are also asking these questions and becoming aware and possibly even establishing contact. Anyway, is there anything you'd like to add regarding those 4 years that really stand out in terms of what you gain in knowledge, or any particular concepts that Ra taught that really struck a chord for you?
Well, what you were just talking about really was the thing that struck the chord the most. I think that the fact that there are so many groups around making contact with unseen entities of higher dimensions, getting information that's quite similar each to the other. One of the things that we always appreciated about the Confederation contact, Ra is supposedly a member of the Confederation of Planets in the Service of the Infinite Creator, a long name. But one of the things we appreciated about them was that they always said, take whatever we say that has value to you and leave the rest behind if it doesn't make any sense. So I think that's really important, recognizing our free will and our need to exercise our free will, and how we don't have to find total identity with another group just to be able to appreciate what they have to offer. Everybody's got something to offer, like I said before, and it's such a thrill to see these other groups around. So many different people seeking the Creator in a conscious fashion and sharing what they find. So I think that was the most inspiring thing, to know that there were others that were doing the same thing that we were doing. Because it felt like, well, as I began talking to you about pre-incarnative choices, it felt like we were doing what we had planned to do, that it felt right. Our whole life long, it felt like we were moving towards a certain point. We were enjoying where we were, but every step along the way seemed to be correct. We didn't have to ask, go through a pros and a con on, well, should I do this, should I not do this? It was like the inner voice was speaking clearly. So once we found ourselves in the contact, we felt like we had just reached the mountaintop. And we weren't able to stay on the mountaintop because there's a kind of a rarefied air there. After a while, you run out of breath. But we were just so thrilled to have the opportunity to be there. And we're just thrilled now to be able to share what we can.
One of the things that in looking at the comments in the video that we did prior a few years, or almost 2 years ago with Carla, is all the beautiful comments that are made and how people really are touched by the work that you have done. So I certainly hope that you are receiving for yourself, Jim, and Carla as well, that you have done not just something that was of literal value, but of something that was really valuable to other people in so many ways for their own journey, their own spiritual journey, and they're acknowledging that, and I hope you're getting that.
Oh, we hear that all the time, and it just makes us feel so good. We are so glad to be able to help people out in any way we can. We thank everyone.
That's wonderful. Well, Jim, I don't want to make this too strenuous for you. I know you are needing to get back to Carla and possibly work on those pansies as soon as the sun comes out. And I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this time with me. And for our viewers, I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation between Jim and myself, and that what he's had to offer has given you a rounded information of his role as the scribe. And Jim, we shall put a little blurb together that will go in the Huffington Post, and also links to all your different websites and various information. So
thank you so much, Denise. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Until we meet again. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.